She sat in the dark cell, her arms tied, her face bruised and her heart cold like the stone floor beneath her. She had been told stories about humans all her life, stories of how they captured enemies and tore them apart for fun, stories of how they enjoyed watching aliens scream. So when the human soldiers dragged her into this place, she was sure this was her end. She was a proud warrior once, her people feared and respected across many systems, but now she was just a prisoner, with nothing left except her name, which she refused to speak. The metal door creaked open and she didn't move. If they were here to kill her, let them. She had no strength left to fight. A tall human stepped in, wearing dark clothes and a helmet. He held a tray in his hands. She narrowed her eyes. Her stomach growled, but she stayed still. The man said nothing, just walked over and placed the tray gently in front of her. Then he turned and left without a word. She stared at the tray. There was water, a piece of bread, and some strange food she couldn't name. She waited. Maybe it was a trick. Maybe if she touched it, they'd shock her or laugh at her weakness. Her people always said humans were cruel. Her hands trembled, and she pulled them back, letting the food sit there untouched. The next day, he came again. Same tray, same quiet steps. He placed it down and left again. Her throat burned with thirst, but she didn't want to show weakness. Still, something inside her started to change. Why wasn't he speaking? Why wasn't he laughing or shouting like the story said? On the third day, hunger won. She drank the water first, slowly, as if expecting poison. Nothing happened. Then she bit the bread, dry and tasteless, but enough to fill her stomach. She felt shame, but also relief. That night, she curled up in the corner, tears quietly falling from her eyes. She hated feeling weak. But more than that, she hated the silence in her heart. When the man returned the next day, she looked at him differently. He still said nothing, just placed the food and turned to go. This time she picked up the tray and threw it toward the door. The metal clanged loudly as food spilled across the floor. She stood shakily and shouted something in her native language. An insult. Daring him to react, he didn't. He stood there calmly, looked down at the mess, then met her eyes. For a moment, she thought she saw something strange. Kindness. Then he nodded slightly and walked out, leaving the mess behind. She slumped to the floor, confused. This wasn't how humans were supposed to act. Where was the pain? The mocking? The cold smiles? Later that night, the door opened again. Her head snapped up, ready to fight if needed. But he wasn't holding a weapon. He had something white in his hands, bandages. He pointed at the cut on her arm. She hissed, baring her teeth like a wild animal, but he didn't flinch. Slowly, he placed the bandages on the ground and stepped back. She didn't touch them at first, watching him like a hawk. He waited a few seconds, then turned to leave. She waited until the door shut before crawling to the bandages. Her arm throbbed with pain, blood crusting along the edge. She had no idea how to use the human wrapping, but she tried anyway, clumsy and unsure. It wasn't perfect, but it helped, just a little. That night she stared at the ceiling. Her people told her humans were monsters. But this one, he never said a word, never lifted a hand, never smiled or laughed. He just helped, quietly. She didn't sleep much. Her mind kept replaying the moment he looked into her eyes and didn't look away. There was no fear in him, and strangely, no hate either. Days passed, and every time he came, she watched more closely. He walked the same way, carried the same tray, and never forced her to speak. One day she whispered a single word, her name. She didn't know why she did it, but it slipped from her lips before she could stop it. He paused in the doorway, turned, slightly, and gave her the smallest nod. Then he left, but something heavy lifted from her chest. She had spoken her name after so long, and someone had heard it. Maybe that meant something. She began eating more, drinking more, her body slowly growing stronger. And with that strength came questions. Why was he doing this? Why didn't he treat her like a prisoner? or an enemy. She still didn't trust him, not fully, but each time he entered, she didn't feel fear anymore, just confusion, and a strange feeling she couldn't name. Something deep, buried, beginning to rise inside her like warm light through cracks, in stone. Something human, maybe. Something she had never known before. Hope. She woke up to the sound of the door opening again. Her body tensed for a moment, then relaxed when she saw it was him. The same human man, silent and calm. He carried the food tray like always and placed it in front of her. She didn't throw it this time. Instead, she sat up slowly, her eyes watching his every move, but her hands stayed still in her lap. He stood, there for a second as if waiting for something, then turned to leave. She felt her throat move before her mind even allowed it. "Why?" she asked softly. Her voice was dry and rough, but clear enough. He stopped at the door, looked back over his shoulder and answered, "You're not my enemy anymore." That sentence stayed in her head all day. She repeated it over and over, trying to understand what he meant. Not his enemy. But she had tried to fight his people. Her ship was destroyed during the battle, and most of her crew had died. And yet, here she was, still breathing, still fed, still left untouched. Her world never forgave enemies. Her people would have tortured him by now if roles were reversed. So why was this human so different? The next day, when he brought the food again, she didn't wait. She took the tray, sat cross-legged, and started eating in front of him. He gave her a short glance, then turned to go. But this time, before the door shut, she said, "I don't understand you." He didn't reply, but she noticed his shoulders paused for a breath. She wasn't sure why she kept talking to him. Maybe it was because he was the only one who hadn't looked at her with fear or hate. Maybe it was the silence between them that felt less cold now, less sharp. On the fourth day, she tried to test him again. She said something rude in her native language, a sharp insult, and waited to see if he understood. He didn't react, or maybe he did, but hid it well. He simply placed the tray and looked at her calmly. "Are you angry?" she asked with narrowed eyes. "No," he replied quietly. "I've seen worse." She blinked, not sure how to reply to that. In her world, showing emotion during battle was weakness. But this human, he didn't look weak, just tired, like he had lived through many storms and survived each one. She didn't sleep much that night. Her mind was full of questions. Her people believed emotions should be hidden. Her father once punished her for crying after her sister died. He said warriors must bury feelings deep like bones in the sand. But this human didn't seem to hide anything. He looked at her like she was more than just a weapon, more than just a prisoner. She touched the bandage on her arm. It was still clean, still wrapped the way he had shown her. She didn't understand why that made her feel safe, but it did. The next time he entered, she stood up slowly and walked closer. He didn't move, didn't raise a hand, just watched her carefully. She bent down, picked up the tray from his hands, and looked up at him. "You don't talk much," she said. "I talk when it matters," he replied, then gave her a small nod and stepped back. Something about that made her lips twitch, almost a smile, almost. She sat down and began eating while he stood by the door. As she chewed the dry bread, she asked, "What's your name?" He hesitated, then answered, "Jace." She repeated the name in her mind. Jace, a simple word, but it warmed her chest in a strange way. "My name is Rava," she said. "I think you earned it." He nodded, then quietly left. Every day after that, their quiet talks continued. Small words at first, then stories broken and slow. She told him about the stars her people came from, about the songs sung before war. He listened and told her stories about Earth, about oceans and forests she had never seen. She wanted to see those oceans one day. One night she had a nightmare again. Screams, fire, the sound of her ship breaking apart. She woke up with sweat on her forehead and her hands gripping the cold floor. Then she heard the door open. Her eyes snapped toward it. And there he was, Jace, holding a blanket this time, not food. "I heard you scream," he said gently. It's all right. She didn't speak. Her throat felt closed, but her hands reached forward as he placed the blanket near her. He didn't touch her, didn't step too close, just waited. She pulled the blanket over her shoulders, and for the first time she didn't feel cold anymore. When he left, she whispered into the silence, "Thank you." She didn't know if he heard it, but somehow she hoped he did. That night, as she curled up, she thought about his face, the way he looked at her without fear, without control, and something inside her stirred. Something quiet. Something that had been asleep for a long time. She was supposed to hate humans, supposed to want revenge, but now, she wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. All she knew was that the human named Jace didn't treat her like a prisoner, and for the first time, she didn't feel like one. The next morning she sat in the corner of her cell, waiting. Her hands rested on her knees and her eyes stayed fixed on the door. She didn't know why she felt nervous. Maybe it was because she had dreamed about Jace again, not as an enemy, not as a guard, but as someone walking beside her on a peaceful path under blue skies she had never seen. When the door finally opened, her heart jumped. It was him, just like always, carrying the food tray. But this time, his face looked tired. There was a faint bruise under his eye. Her brows pulled together with concern before she could hide it. "What happened?" she asked quietly. Jace glanced at her and gave a small smile. "Prisoner fight, not you, don't worry." He placed the tray down and turned to leave, but she stood up quickly. "Wait," she said, surprising even herself. He stopped, watching her carefully. She walked over slowly and touched his arm with her fingertips just to see if he would pull away. He didn't. His body stayed calm, his eyes steady. She looked at where her hand touched him and whispered, "Why don't you flinch? I'm still your enemy, aren't I?" "No," he said. "You were, but not now." She felt heat rise in her cheeks, not from anger, but from something else, something she didn't fully understand. She dropped her hand and stepped back, confused. "I don't know how to feel about you," she admitted. "It would be easier if you were cruel." He gave a quiet breath of laughter, then nodded. "Same here." Later that day, she sat with her back against the cold wall, staring at the food tray untouched in front of her. Her stomach growled, but her thoughts were louder. What was happening to her? She used to be a warrior, fierce, cold, and full of fire. But now her fire was flickering in a new direction, and that direction pointed toward a human man with soft eyes and calm words. The next few days passed with small changes. Jace started, bringing extra food, fruit pieces, something sweet she had never tasted. The first time she tried one, her face lit up and he saw it. She turned away quickly, but not before he smiled. Sometimes they talked, sometimes they didn't. But even the silence felt warm now, like a safe blanket wrapped around them both. She began to sit near the door when he came, not because she had to, but because she wanted to be close, to see his face, to hear his voice, even for a moment. One night, screams echoed from the hallway, sharp and wild. She jumped to her feet, her warrior instincts returning. Her claws extended halfway before she remembered she was in a human cell, behind a locked door, unable to help or escape. Then she heard it. Jace's voice shouting outside, followed by the sound of something heavy crashing. Her breath caught, fear stabbing her heart in a way she never expected. Not fear for herself, but for him. Her hands clenched the bars as she listened. Minutes later, the door burst open. Jace stumbled in, blood dripping from a cut on his forehead. Behind him, the hall was a mess of broken lights and alarms. "You're hurt," she shouted, running toward him without thinking. She grabbed his shoulders, steadying him as he nearly fell. "I'm okay," he said weakly. "There was a riot. I had to check on you first." She looked at his bleeding head, then at his hands, which were trembling. "You came here first, you idiot," she whispered. But her arms wrapped around him before her mouth could stop the words. He froze for a second, surprised, then slowly returned the hug, her body pressed tightly against his armor. For a moment, there was no cell, no war, no past, just two broken people holding each other in the quiet middle of chaos. She pulled back and reached for the cloth from her bed, pressing it gently against the cut on his head. "You're a terrible soldier," she said, her voice shaking. "But maybe a good man." Jace gave a small laugh. "Thanks, I think." She helped him sit on the floor, and for the next hour she stayed beside him, checking the wound, asking questions, making sure he didn't fall asleep. Every time he closed his eyes, she nudged him awake. "Don't sleep," she whispered. "Stay here, stay with me." His eyes opened again, tired but full of something warm. "You care," he said softly. She didn't answer, but the look in her eyes told the truth. She cared more than she wanted to admit, more than she ever imagined possible for a human. That night, when the guards finally arrived and took him to the medical bay, she sat alone, the silence around her louder than ever before. She touched her chest, where her heart beat faster than it ever had in battle. She wasn't sure what was awakening inside her, but it felt powerful and terrifying. She lay down, staring at the ceiling, remembering the weight of him in her arms, the warmth of his breath near her ear, the way he said her name like it mattered. And as sleep came, her last thought was not of escape, not of war, but of him, Jace, the human who didn't kill her, didn't hurt her, but instead touched her heart. The days felt longer without Jace. Every time the door opened, she hoped to see him standing there. But it was always someone else, another guard, cold and silent. They brought her food, but never looked at her, never spoke her name. The cell felt empty now, colder than before, and the silence inside her chest returned like a heavy stone. She didn't care about the food. She just wanted to know. Was he okay? On the fourth day, the door opened again, and this time it was him. Jace stood in the doorway with a bandage across his forehead. His steps were slower, but his eyes still held the same calm. She stood up quickly, her breath catching in her throat. "You're alive," she whispered. He smiled, tired but real. "Takes more than a riot to get rid of me." She almost ran to him but stopped herself. Her fingers curled into fists as she fought the strange emotions rising inside her. Jace stepped in and placed the tray down, but instead of leaving, he stayed. "Captain said I can assign you to help in storage," he said. "You're strong, you won't escape, and you've earned some trust." Her eyes widened. "You trust me?" She asked quietly. He nodded. "Do you trust me?" She didn't answer, but she followed him out of the cell without chains, without fear. They walked through the narrow prison halls together. His presence beside her felt strange, too peaceful, too familiar. She could feel others staring at her. Guards, staff, even other prisoners. Whispers floated behind them, but Jace didn't react. She stayed close to him, not because she had to, but because it felt right. Inside the storage room, he handed her boxes and told her where to place them. She worked in silence at first, her eyes watching him more than the crates. He moved slowly, carefully, still healing from his injury. She felt her chest tighten again, the same way it had the night he bled in front of her. After a while, she spoke. "My people believe emotions are weakness," she said. "We are trained to hide feelings even from ourselves." Jace leaned against the wall, wiping sweat from his brow. "Then maybe your people are wrong," he said gently. She turned, to him, confused. "You think weakness is good?" He looked at her, a soft smile on his lips. "No, I think it's not weakness at all. I think feelings make us strong, because they remind us we're alive." She didn't know what to say. Her whole life she had been told to bury feelings, to kill mercy, to crush anything that made her soft. But here he was, kind, gentle, and somehow stronger than any warrior she'd ever met. Later, when the room grew quiet, she sat on a crate and watched him fix a broken device. His hands moved, with focus steady and sure. "Why are you like this?" she asked suddenly. "Why are you kind to someone who was once your enemy?" He didn't look up. "Because I've seen too much hate," he said, "and I'm tired of it." She lowered her gaze, his words sinking deep. She remembered the last time someone had spoken kindly to her. It was her sister years ago before the war took her. Since then, her life had been all fire and steel until Jace the next day. She returned to the storage room before he even came for her. A small smile touched his lips when he saw her waiting. "You're early," he said. "I didn't want to sit in that cell anymore," she replied. "I like it better here." They worked side by side, and sometimes they even laughed. The first time she laughed, it surprised them both. It was a small sound, strange and rusty but real. Jace stopped and looked at her. Was that a laugh? She blinked, then looked away. "Maybe," she said softly. "Don't get used to it." But inside something bloomed, something light and warm, like sunlight cracking through old armor. She didn't know what was happening to her, but it wasn't painful. It was something else, something beautiful. At night, she sat in her cell, remembering the way Jace looked at her when she smiled. Not like she was a prisoner, not like an enemy, but like a person, like someone who mattered. And for the first time, she didn't feel broken anymore. The prison felt different now, not because the walls changed, but because she had. And it all started with a human who treated her not with fear or hate, but with kindness. And now she found herself waiting for him, not out of fear, not out of hunger, but because she missed him when he was gone. She was still a warrior, but maybe she didn't have to be made of stone. Maybe, just maybe, something new was awakening inside her, something fragile and powerful at the same time, and it terrified her. But she didn't want it to stop. The night was quiet. Too quiet. Rava sat on a crate in the storage room waiting for Jace. He was running late, and something in her chest didn't feel right. She told herself to stay calm, but the silence around her felt wrong. She stood up, slowly walking toward the door when she heard the sound. Yelling, heavy footsteps, metal clashing against metal. A riot. It was happening again. Before she could react, the door slammed open and a prisoner rushed in, not human, not one of hers either. His face was twisted with rage, and in his hand was a sharp metal pipe. His eyes locked on her with pure hate. She raised her arms to defend herself, but she had no weapon, no armor, nothing. The prisoner ran at her, shouting something in a language she didn't understand. She dodged the first swing, barely. The second one grazed her shoulder. She stumbled back, hitting the wall, pain burning. Through her side, the attacker raised the pipe again, and she braced for the next hit, but it never came. A blur of motion crashed into the attacker from behind. The pipe flew from his hands as both bodies slammed to the ground. Jace was on top of him, fists flying, blood spilling. He shouted, ordered the attacker to stand down, but the prisoner fought back like a wild beast. They rolled across the floor, knocking over crates and supplies. Rava tried to move, tried to help, but her shoulder throbbed and her legs felt weak. Jace blocked another strike, but took a deep hit to his ribs. He grunted in pain, then finally slammed the attacker into the wall hard enough to knock him out cold. Silence returned. Jace stood there, breathing heavily, blood running down the side of his face again. His shirt was torn and one arm hung limply. She rushed to him, not caring about her own pain. "You're hurt," she said, reaching out. "I'm fine," he lied. And then his legs gave out. She caught him before he hit the ground, lowering him slowly to the floor. Her hands shook as she pressed against the bleeding wound on his side. "Why did you come here first?" she asked, her voice rising. "You could have died." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "Because you matter," he whispered. "You're not just a prisoner to me." Her heart stopped. She stared at him, stunned. She had never heard those words from anyone, not even her own family. For a moment, everything went still. Her fingers tightened against his wound, her face close to his. "You're a fool," she whispered, "but you're my fool now." She grabbed cloth from a broken crate, tore it, and wrapped it around his ribs. It wasn't perfect, but it slowed the bleeding. Jace winced but didn't complain. His head rested against her arm, his breathing slowing. "I didn't know I could feel this," she whispered, more to herself than him. "I didn't think humans were capable of anything but war, but you proved me wrong." He looked up at her, barely smiling. "You're not what I expected either." She held him close, her arms wrapped around him like armor. No one came for them for hours. The prison was in chaos, and in that chaos they had found something stronger than hate, stronger than fear. When the guards finally arrived, weapons drawn, she stood in front of Jace, ready to protect him if they tried to take him the wrong way. But they only nodded and rushed him to the medical bay. She tried to follow, but they stopped her, locked her back in her cell. Alone again, she sat on the floor, holding the blood-stained cloth he had left behind. Her eyes burned with tears, but she didn't let them fall. She stared at the wall, her heart heavy, but not cold. He had bled for her, fought for her, saved her. She wasn't just a warrior anymore, not just a prisoner. She was someone who was cared for, someone who meant something. And now, she would never forget the feeling of his arms around her, his heartbeat against hers, the way he said she mattered. Something inside her had changed, and there was no going back. She didn't want to go back. She sat in her cell with her knees pulled close to her chest. The room was quiet, but her mind was full of noise. She couldn't stop thinking about Jace, how he looked when they carried him away, how much blood there was, and how cold his skin felt in her arms. She had tried to follow him, but the guards didn't let her. They locked her away again like before, but this time it felt worse, not because of the cell, but because he was gone. 2 days passed. No one gave her news. No one told her if he was alive. She tried asking the guards, but they ignored her. Her food sat untouched. Her eyes never left the door. Each time it opened, her heart jumped, hoping it was him. But it never was. The silence was killing her, slowly, piece by piece. Then one morning, the door opened. A tall officer walked in. Not Jace, but someone she had seen once during a patrol. He looked serious, with a data pad in hand. "You've been cleared for release," he said coldly. "Your people have signed a treaty. You're going home." She stared at him, not moving, not blinking. "I'm what?" she asked softly. "You're going back to your homeworld," he repeated. "You leave tomorrow, prepare yourself." She should have felt joy, relief, victory. But instead, her heart dropped. She looked down at her hands, scarred and bruised, and felt nothing, just one thought echoing inside her. What about Jace? That night she couldn't sleep. She paced the room, chewing her lip, pulling at her hair. She couldn't leave without seeing him. She had to know, had to say something, even if it was goodbye. She tried to think of a plan, and only one came to mind. Break the rule, just once. In the middle of the night, when the hall was mostly empty and quiet, she moved. Her training as a warrior helped her step lightly, avoid the cameras, hide from passing patrols. She had memorized the layout. From her time walking with Jace, she knew the medical bay was on the lower level. Room 17, that's where they took him. She slipped through a side hallway, heart pounding with each step. Her shoulder still ached from the riot, but she pushed the pain away. This wasn't about her anymore. She reached the door to the medical wing and peeked through the small glass window. A human nurse sat behind a desk, half asleep, quiet as a shadow. Rava opened the door and slipped in. She moved past the nurse without a sound, down the hallway, passing room after room until she saw it. Room 17. She placed her hand on the door, hesitating. What if he wasn't there? What if he was dead? She took a deep breath and pushed the door open. He was there, lying in the bed, pale but breathing, bandages wrapped around his chest and shoulder. A machine beeped softly beside him, showing his heart was still fighting. Her legs almost gave out. She stepped closer and sat beside him. Her fingers touched his hand gently, warm enough to make her eyes fill with tears. "Jace," she whispered, "I'm being sent home." His eyes didn't open, but his fingers twitched slightly. She leaned in closer, her voice trembling. "I don't want to go." She sat there for a long time, holding his hand, watching his chest rise and fall. Every second made her heart ache more. She wanted to stay, but she had no right to make that choice, not anymore. Finally, as the lights dimmed, she stood up, kissed his hand, and turned to leave. But just as she reached the door, a voice stopped her. "Rava." She turned around sharply. Jace's eyes were open, barely, but they were looking at her, full of life and warmth. "You came," he whispered. She rushed back to his side, grabbing his hand again. "Of course I came," she said, trying to smile through her tears. "You're the only reason I'm still breathing." He chuckled weakly. "Same." She leaned in, closer, her forehead touching his. "They're sending me home, Jace. I don't want to go without you." His fingers tightened around hers, even with little strength. "Then don't." Tears slid down her cheeks. She had been strong all her life, trained not to cry, not to feel. But with him, everything was different. "Say it again," she whispered. "Don't go," he said, voice clearer now. "Stay. With me." She smiled through her tears, the kind of smile that only came once in a lifetime. "Then I'll stay. Rules or not, I'll stay." That night she stayed by his side, not as a prisoner, not as a warrior, but as someone who had found something worth fighting for, not with weapons but with her heart. And for the first time she didn't feel like she was running from anything. She felt like she was finally where she belonged. The ship that carried her home landed on the dusty plains of her world. The air smelled of iron and smoke, and the sky was covered in gray clouds. Rava stepped down the ramp with heavy feet. Her people waited for her, warriors in sharp armor. Eyes cold and sharp, they looked at her like she was a stranger. Not one of them. She felt their judgment like knives in her skin. The leader of her clan, an older warrior with scars across his face, stepped forward. "You return alive," he said. "Yet you were captured. That is shame." Rava kept her head high, but inside, her heart felt small. She wanted to tell him about Jace, about the man who saved her, who treated her like more than a weapon. But she stayed silent. Her people would never understand. To them, kindness was weakness, and weakness was death. Days turned into weeks. She trained again with her clan, fought with blades and fists, ran across the harsh deserts to prove she was still strong. Her body obeyed, but her mind was far away. At night she would close her eyes and see Jace's face, pale on the hospital bed, whispering her name, telling her to stay. Her people noticed the change. Some whispered behind her back. "She is soft now. Her time with the humans broke her spirit." Others laughed. "She is no longer a warrior, she is broken," but Rava ignored them. Every insult only made her stronger. She fought harder, struck faster, and proved she still had fire in her veins. Yet even in victory, her heart felt empty. She wasn't fighting for them anymore. She was fighting for herself, and for him. One evening, as the twin moons rose over the desert, her younger cousin approached her. "You've changed," the girl said quietly. "You don't fight with anger anymore. You fight with something else." Rava looked at the girl, her sharp eyes softening. "I fight with purpose," she answered. "I fight because someone showed me that life is more than war." The girl tilted her head, curious. "A human?" she asked, almost whispering. Rava froze, then nodded slowly. "Yes," she said. "A human." Her cousin said nothing more, but Rava saw the spark of understanding in her eyes. Maybe not all her people were blind. Maybe not all of them would see feelings as weakness. As the days went by, Rava began to feel like an outsider in her own world. She had returned, but she no longer belonged. The fire in her chest burned for something far away, for a place where she wasn't just a warrior, but a person. She couldn't ignore it anymore. She had to decide. Stay and live the life her people demanded, or leave and follow the voice inside her heart. One night, she stood on the high cliffs, looking at the stars. The wind whipped through her hair as she clenched her fists. She thought of Jace, of his calm eyes, his steady hands, the way he bled for her without hesitation. He had awakened something inside her that she didn't know existed. Hope. Her chest ached as she whispered to the sky, "Wait for me." The next morning she made her choice. She packed little, just her blade, her armor, and a single piece of cloth stained with Jace's blood, the one she had kept hidden since the riot. When her clan asked where she was going, she said only, "To the stars." They mocked her, called her foolish, but she didn't care. She was done living for their approval. She was done being a weapon. She had found something worth more than pride, worth more than tradition. She had found someone who saw her as more than a fighter, someone who looked at her and saw her. She left her world behind that day. Her ship rose into the sky, cutting through the gray clouds. Her heart beat faster with every mile she put between herself and her old life. The stars stretched out before her, endless and bright. Somewhere out there, Jace was waiting and she would find him. As the ship entered the vast silence of space, she sat in the pilot's chair and closed her eyes. She could almost hear his voice again, soft and steady. You matter. Her lips curved into a smile, small but real. She had been captured, broken, and left for dead. But she had risen again. Not with anger, but with hope, and all because one human chose not to kill her but to awaken her heart. The stars welcomed her, and for the first time in her life she felt truly free. Her journey wasn't over, it had only just begun, and no matter how long it took, no matter what worlds she had to cross, she would find him, because she knew now. She was not just a warrior, not just a survivor, she was something more, and with Jace she could finally be whole.